have somebody come in and move out. We've all been moving around. The first bill, if you'll look on the agenda, is the bill that's Thank you. By its title, might be confusing with a word we haven't seen a lot before, but we're starting to see a lot more of, is digitization. If you have ever heard of deep fake, that's what this is. This is, but I know Senator Johnson and a few other bills were drafted with a definition to describe what digitization is. So I use that definition to try to keep us consistent within our Mississippi law, which I know sometimes we aren't able to do. But a digitization is an altered image or audio or both made to look just like the individual. And with AI and technology moving the way it is today, this is becoming a very big problem because it's very, very easy to make something look exactly like, Senator England said, well, I drop out of the race. Don't worry about going and voting. And when I wouldn't say that, most likely. Well, maybe after this year, we'll see. But that's obviously a problem for us. It's something we need to address. It's happening in other states. They're addressing it. I should mention to you that we have a committee sub. So I'm going to go through the committee sub part. You'll see that a digitization only applies when it's a reasonable person would believe that it depicts the speech or content of the individual, and it's substantially uses technical means. So we're not talking about like an SNL skit or an impersonation or anything like that. And it has to be disseminated. And then you'll see that part two actually creates what leads to this charge or would lead to this being leading to charges against an individual. If somebody disseminates a digitization, they're guilty of the crime if it takes place within 90 days of an election. So of course this is election specific because it's in this committee, obviously. It's disseminated without the consent of the depicted individual. There's an intent to injure the candidate, to influence the results of the election, or to deter a person from voting, well, that's it. That's your three factors. Section 3 or paragraph 3 there outlines the punishment. There is a 5-year or $10,000 punishment if the violation is committed with the intent to cause violence, cause bodily harm, or to deter any person from voting. Paragraph 4, and of course, subparagraph B there talks about it's 1 year or a fine of $5,000 if it doesn't reach the requirement of subparagraph A above. Paragraph 4 there outlines the cause of action. Who has a cause of action for this? The Attorney General, District Attorney may bring it. The depicted individual, the candidate, or a political party can bring a cause of action for dissemination of digitization. If you look under 3 or paragraph 5, we have some language that says that if the viewer depicted did not engage in the depicted speech and or conduct, or if you say prominently across the digitization that, look, this is not the person depicted, that shall be a defense to prosecution. It's not an ultimate defense, but that is defensible. Paragraph 6 is language that we see commonly when we deal with things like this, when we're looking at social media or radio or television. This is not, the intent is not to punish the platform that is used, whether it be television or TV or Facebook or any of those venues. This is against the individual that either makes the digitization or contracts to make the digitization. And you'll also see right there on line 100, just to make sure that we can all have fun still, this is content that constitutes satire or parody is not included in this. Kyle, I gave a very brief rundown of the bill. Is there anything that I missed that you would like to add to this? If you'd like to, and if you do, I'd ask you to step up to the microphone there so that we can. Well, good. Well, that makes me feel better. Thank you, Kyle. Are there any questions on this bill?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm going to recognize Senator Blunt, and then I'll recognize Senator Blackwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned satire. Where is that? I'm looking for that.
Be line 100. So you'll see line 73 says this section does not apply to.
Okay.
And then under line 100, content that constitutes satire or parody.
So I'm glad you're bringing this issue forward, and I think that it's important that voters not be tricked with thinking that a candidate has said or done something that he or she didn't do, and they put words in my mouth or words in your mouth. But I'm thinking about things where, like, if the issue in a campaign is, say, funding roads and bridges, and there's a little cartoon of me in a little car driving down on roads and bridges, either to praise me or to criticize me for something I've done on roads or bridges. And it's obviously a cartoon of me, and it's obviously me, and it's about an issue. Is that going to get somebody in trouble? Is that going to be prohibited under this?
I don't believe so. And let me,
Would that be satire?
well, that would be satire. It also wouldn't be, I don't believe that would fall under the definition of digitization, which is, so it's a realistic manner. So if it's a cartoon or something satirical like that,
Yeah.
wouldn't apply. What it would apply to is if it was some other individual or computer generated Senator David Blunt that's riding down the road and something like that occurs, and it's not you, but it looks like you and depicts you. That's where that would be the realistic type activity we're trying to prohibit, and it's even the voice. I'll point out that even audio is included in this because they have technology that's able to make it sound like you're making a phone call.
Yeah, I'm concerned about that. I'm very concerned about that.
That's right.
But if someone wanted to criticize me for something that I did on roads and bridges, say, I don't know why. I think I've got a good record on roads and bridges. But if they did, they have a little cartoon of me driving down the road, and it says David Blunt's doing nothing for our roads and bridges, would that? And it's not putting words in my mouth. It's just what happened in the campaign. Can you not do that?
So looking back at the definition, and again, it says a realistic manner, and then if you look at 18, it says a reasonable person would believe depicts the speech and or conduct of an individual who did not engage in the speech and or conduct as presented. So I think those two together may cover what you have, but I'm happy to take a look at this language with you if you think there's a way that we can tighten it up to maybe better our definition. I'm certainly willing to work with you, Senator Blunt.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. This is going to be increasing an issue, as you know.
That's right. Yes. Thank you, Senator Blunt. Senator Blackwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got two questions, and both of them are probably pertain to definitions. But on line 18, what's a reasonable person? And then on line 39 says is disseminated with the intent to injure. How do you measure intent?
Senator Blackwell, I would consider you most of the time to be a reasonable person. But I will say, I'm gonna ask legal counsel if she can maybe provide us the reason we use phrases like that in statutes. Reasonable person. It's a standard that's used throughout many statutes. I know you'll see the reasonable prudent person or the reasonable person, and a lot of times that is up to interpretation by the courts. So if the judge or the jury says, look, no reasonable person would have believed that this is Senator Blackwell, pushing an issue or speaking against an issue, that's why we have jury trials a lot of times, is to allow someone to interpret that part of a law. And Ms. Bradshaw, do you have anything to add to that?
Just a reasonable person of ability, knowledge. It's just a common legal standard.
So then how about intent?
So the intent to injure, again, it's a legal phrase. Prosecutors use it a lot. You have to show intent, and so that's just one of their standards they use. They've got to prove to the judge and the jury, or both, that there was an intent by the individual to injure the person. So it's just a legal term of art, is the best way I know to explain it. Any other questions? Yeah, Senator Fillingane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is the intent really what we're trying to counter, or is it the actual harming we're trying to prohibit?
That's a good question that I'm going to ask counsel if she can expand on that for us.
An intentional.
So what she said is, I don't think we've paid our bills on these microphones. So
Don't touch it.
yeah, I'm not.
Get you
What
started.
council said is that the intent to harm is just by nature, you know, something that can be harmful, but if there was no intent involved, then they wouldn't meet this standard. And Kyle, I see you standing up back there. Would you like to speak to that? I know this is some language that's very important. And Kyle, by the way, is from the Secretary of State's office. He's worked with me on several things this year, and this is one thing that the Secretary of State's obviously very interested in. So would you like to speak to the intent to harm standard that we've drafted into this language?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think it's probably more towards the intent because we don't want to capture somebody who sometimes this does get shared online and the original person had an intent to harm, but the second person, they just saw it on Facebook and they believe it's real. They had no intent to harm the candidate by spreading misinformation. They see something under the first definition that they believe is legitimate. They shared it because they thought it had some interest or bearing on the election, but they actually had no intent to harm the candidate. They thought they were sharing something that was true. So we don't want to capture people who are caught up in really being duped, just like, you know, with this fake disinformation.
So what you're saying is you want to get the original bad actor, not shares or innocent type shares like that.
Person on Facebook sharing something that they believe to be true just as well as the general public. A reasonable person believes it to be true, so that's why we had that intent.
Okay, thank you. Senator Fitligan, any follow-ups or other questions?
Yeah, I mean, I understand what he's saying. I feel like the harm is being done to the candidate, whether the intent was there or not, because you're still getting misinformation or disinformation put out in the public, and that unwitting person is still harming. But I understand what you're saying as far as the one you're seeking to punish is the one who originated the misinformation or disinformation. I was just trying to think from a trial standpoint, is it easier to prove the intent or is it easier just to prove the harm done? But that would be for y'all to decide, I guess. The second question I have is on line 36, why the 90-day prohibition from the date of the election? So are we saying that if it's 91 days from there, and someone's out there using my image to make me look bad, you know, that's easy enough to do, but doing it intentionally to harm me in an election, should we care that it's only 90 days out? I mean, 6 months out still does harm.
Yes, and Senator Fitligan, that's a good point. And as we know, I think the object there was to make sure that we were within a campaign season or within an election cycle. But I know those go, those run a lot longer than 90 days. So
There are already being phone calls made right now for 4 years from now for fundraising, as I'm told. So I think the campaign windows are increasingly growing.
That's
So
right.
just food for thought. I don't know that the 90 days would capture all the harm that maybe we're trying to.
If I had to guess, and Senator Chasnon, I'll get to you in just a second. If I had to guess, I imagine it's maybe mirrors some other state language or other language has been put through. Kyle, would you like to speak to the 90 days selection? Thank you. Glad you're here.
The reason we were looking, and Chairman England's right, we looked at this 90-day, that's several other states who had put this in, had put in some timeframes. We had that same question, really the same thoughts you did, why this? So we started digging into it. This is obviously going to be a kind of have some First Amendment grounds to it. It could be seen as political speech. So looking at the Supreme Court's kind of body on First Amendment, they always like to have counter speech be the first line of defense. So if there's enough time for counter speech, the court will generally say that this was not narrowly tailored if someone has enough time to they come out and say this was a lie. So in order to narrowly tailor this to survive scrutiny against the court, we looked at what other states had done, their body of work, that they had limited to a time frame to that core election season where there really was limited time to get back and rebut and not have counter speech and call it for what it is.
Kyle, before we get to the floor on this, assuming we pass committee here shortly, would you be willing to maybe let us know and give me some information on what other states have looked, what their time frame looks like, just so I can help that and get back with Senator Fitligan. Anybody else may have questions about where that comes from and why it may be helpful in this legislation?
I'd be happy, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Senator Chasnoff.
I wanted to ask if this would also apply. Let's say someone was trying to make their campaign look better. And so using the sort of AI that's available, they had an endorsement perhaps that was on the radio that sounded like Morgan Freeman or Oprah Winfrey or some other important Mississippian said, vote for Lydia because she's fabulous. Would this also apply to using that sort of deceit?
I don't believe this bill would apply to that because this bill deals with candidates. And so but I'm sure there are other parts of the law outside of elections where using a person's image or likeness or their voice, even whether it be a digitized voice or digitized image. We do have other laws moving through even this session in other committees right now that address that, because this really is something new and we're just trying to jump and get ahead of it. But I do understand the question. I will certainly get clarification for you whether that applies, but my after reading this bill and working on it, as of right now, don't believe it applies to, say, a wonderful voice of Morgan Freeman endorsing Senator Chasnoff and it be computer
Or
related.
Senator England?
I'm sure he would anyway, so we probably wouldn't question it, but and maybe the intent to harm comes in. But let me look into that and talk with you before I bring it up on the floor. I promise you I will bring up this issue if we're able to get this through.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? If not, do I have a motion? Another question? Yes, Senator Fillion.
So following up on Senator Chastel's question,
Mhm.
I think more to the point, you're going to have people potentially, depending on your district, having, President Biden's voice or
Mhm.
image. I endorse, candidate X, or President Trump endorsing candidate X.
Mhm.
It's certainly under the definition here doesn't seem to apply because if the intent is to harm, that must be
Mhm.
proven. You would assume if you're a Democratic candidate, you want the leader of your party endorsing you or vice versa with a Republican, but it still isn't right. I mean, certainly there's probably a harm done to the person you're impersonating potentially. So I just think we should think about that a little more broadly and see if that's something we should try to capture in this legislation.
So I'll say on lines 39 to 40, where it says disseminate with intent to injure the candidate, it goes on to say influence the results of an election or deter any person from voting. So I think that may catch that issue, and it also may answer Senator Chasnoff's question. I just happened to look down and see that, but I think, and again, the cause of action may be brought by a candidate or a political party or the attorney general. So if you had someone endorse, say if you had President Trump endorsing me in an election and it wasn't him, it was digitization, the Democrat Party could then would then have a cause of action to bring a suit. And under Section C, they could argue that the intent was to influence the results of an election.
So wouldn't you then also, to just completely capture that, add to the persons who could bring the cause of action, the person who was impersonated wrongfully? So that President Biden could bring the action or President Trump could bring the action.
That's right. And under on line 62, the depicted individual does have a cause of action. So that would be President Biden, and that in your scenario.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator Fillion. Any other questions? These great questions. Thank you for the debate. If no other questions, do I have a motion? Motion is title sufficient, do pass committee sub. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. We will report that bill out. Next on the agenda, our good friend Senator Jeff Tate has Senate Bill number 2425. He is going to discuss that with us. Yeah, you don't want a microphone I've had to deal with.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay. Senate Bill 2425. This bill is actually a definition bill. This is not a bill that's going to change anything. It's just going to help define exactly what 2315-907 is. So what it does. Hot air. So on line 16, when I was in school, you would put a comma there, but I guess now you don't. So that's the only thing that's being removed. 16 is a comma. And then lines 21 through 32, all that is simply defining caregiver. It's defining family member and household member. We passed this bill last year, and we're in a lawsuit over it. And according to the Secretary of State and the Attorney General's offices, they believe that putting these definitions in here will help get us out of that, and we can continue to have this great law on our books. That's the explanation of the bill. I'll be happy to take any questions.
This language clarifies the definition, is that
That's,
correct?
that's correct. That's,
Clarifying language. Thank you, Senator Tate. Senator Bryan.
I'd like to speak on behalf of Senator Tate's English teacher.
I was hoping someone would.
There is a difference between the woods are lovely, dark and deep, and the woods are lovely, dark, and deep. And the reason we know that the phrase is pronounced the first way is there is no comma between dark and deep. If the intent was otherwise, there would be a comma there, and this is known as the Oxford comma. It's a very fine grammatical proposition, served us well, lo these many years. People at Oxford apparently are very fond of it. But for some reason, escaping human understanding, drafting has taken it upon itself that in their spare time, because obviously they have time on their hands these days, they will remove the Oxford comma from the code. And it's a terrible idea. And I think in all seriousness, this obsession with removing the Oxford comma can create ambiguity when you get involved in some of the language we have on the code, which, you know, can tend to ramble and go on and on. Yeah. So therefore, I move, if I'm recognized to do so, to reinstate the comma on line 16.
So we've heard the amendment, and I think it was very well discussed and explained to us. And even as someone who went to school in Starkville and not Oxford, I'll be okay with an Oxford comma, but I would like to ask the author of the bill, would the author of the bill like to say anything or have any questions on the amendment?
I disagree that drafters have too much time on their hands, but I'm absolutely with you that that is a very friendly amendment, the friendliest of all amendments, and I endorse it.
All right. Well, I'm glad this was able to happen today on such a busy day. So the amendment, as I understand it, is on line 16 where we have 3 stars. We will add, the amendment is to add the Oxford comma back to line 16. Did I state your amendment correctly, Senator Bryan?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, but upon reflection and upon looking at the note my colleague has handed me, it appears we also need commas on line 27 between the word facility and or, and on line 30 between the word adoption and or.
Sorry, is that your entire amendment that you're stating there?
Without objection, I'd like to offer an amendment to add those 3 commas.
Okay, so that is the amendment, and we do want to be consistent with our Oxford comma placement. So are there any questions on the amendment? I know we've heard it, and I believe we all heard the line numbers, and I'm sure we know exactly what we're talking about here. So are there any questions? Okay, all in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so the amendment does carry. Do we have any other questions on the bill regarding grammar or otherwise? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
Motion. Now, is title sufficient to pass committee sub?
That would be correct. And so we've all heard the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. All right, thank you. Do I have a concluding motion for the committee today?
Report.
We will rise and report. Thank you all very much.